Mason. I'm Lewis Ulmer, Business Development Manager here at First National Bank Alaska. And on behalf of everyone here at the bank, thank you for joining us today for what we hope you will find to be some valuable information. One of the things that many of us here at First National enjoy the most about working for a community bank is the opportunity we have to connect with fellow Alaskans and get to know you both on a personal and a professional level. We developed this Workshop Wednesdays webinar series as an opportunity and a way to engage with you and provide you with some value-added content on various topics. We will be offering this webinar series on a monthly basis going forward, so be on the lookout for new topics that we're offering. We hope we get to see you at a future webinar. Before we turn things over to Mike, just a few things here. In order to avoid any disruptions, we have muted your microphones and turned off your videos. That said, we do want today to be interactive. And so on your screen, you should see a little Q&A icon. If you have any questions at any time during the webinar, click that Q&A icon, type in your question. Mike will be hosting 2 live question and answer sessions. And so he'll be answering those. We hope to have enough time to answer everyone's questions. If we run out of time, Mike will follow up with you directly and answer those. Also, to make this a little bit more interactive, Mike will also be doing some pop quizzes. And so when those come up and Mike asks those questions, you'll also see a little chat box on your screen. Click that chat box, type in your answer, and Mike will be able to let everybody know how they did. So again, the Q&A icon, if you have any questions you'd like him to answer, and the chat icon for the pop quiz section. So with that, Mike, I will turn it over to you.
Sure, and thank you so much, Lewis. My name is Mike Mason. I'm, as Lewis mentioned, a product support manager for First National Bank Alaska. I'm the section head over the electronic funds transfer section. So my responsibilities include directing our ACH and wires activity of the bank and managing the team that provides corporate client support. So as you can imagine, over the years, I've been with the bank almost 13 years now. Any sort of electronic fraud that comes across ends up touching my desk one way or another. And we've seen quite a lot of innovations in the fraudster activities in Alaska, targeting Alaskan businesses and consumers. So this presentation, which I'll go ahead and get started without any further ado, was really put together to address that and try to inform businesses about steps they can take to protect themselves from the cyber threat. So I'll go ahead and launch right into the presentation with a pop quiz that none of you have had a chance to prepare for. Don't worry, no wrong answers on the first one here. Do you know someone, either an individual or a company, who's been the victim of some form of identity theft? Yes or no? And you can just put that in the chat. FYI, that little chat window at the bottom of the screen here will just go to us. It doesn't go to everyone on the presentation, so no worries about other folks seeing your answers. And I don't want to cause anyone any sort of anxiety over the questions. I'm typically not giving you the answer to the question before I ask in traditional college professor nightmare vogue. And I see almost uniform yeses, just a couple of no's. So that's typically what I see. The vast majority of people do tend to know at least an individual or a company who's been victimized by a form of identity theft. And let's get right into what those forms of identity theft look like for businesses. And we will cover some elements of consumer as well during the course of the presentation. All right, so just a brief preview of the topics we'll be covering. We'll discuss the threat environment, what really has facilitated this growth in fraud. We'll discuss the current fraud trends facing Alaskans and Alaska businesses, and then some steps that you can take to prevent being a victim and some best practices that you and your organization can follow. So the threat environment really has changed due to what I call the cybercrime economy. And the reason I call it a cybercrime economy is fraudsters have really leveraged several innovations in technology to create a full chain of business transactions that is very resilient. If one bad actor is removed from that chain, another bad actor is found to take their place, and the conduct continues. The criminal enterprise is not stopped by a single bad guy being taken out. So this economy is thriving. It's well funded, and it utilizes several pieces of technology that have really evolved how crime works in the new in this current decade and moving forward. So there's two key things that developed within around the 2008 to 2010 timeframe, which was the explosion of the dark web, which is not a website that you can get to just by going to Google and searching for it. They're anonymous sites that are hidden through a network called Tor, which basically allows criminals to host websites that can't be identified, can't be taken down very easily, and allow other criminals to network. And what they've done on those sites is they've hosted cybercrime forums where they trade tips and tactics with each other and network to create new criminal connections. What that's led to is a fraud as a service. So almost all of us have some sort of software as a service tool in our environment, either at home, maybe you use Gmail or Hotmail or Yahoo, which is a cloud email provider. That's a software as a service. Maybe at work, you might use Office 365. That's a cloud provided software being provided as a service. Well, fraudsters looked at these innovations that large tech companies were doing to make their operations, more resilient, more scalable, more able to spread. And then they took those same tactics, those same business methodologies, and they applied them to fraud. So now you have hackers for hire, where folks will offer whatever illegal services to whoever can pay for them. They will take botnets, groups of compromised devices, and they'll rent them out to other fraudsters who want to use those devices. And they'll rent malware. They'll take a system essentially designed like a software penetration testing tool, but designed to actually steal money. And they'll rent that system to other fraudsters, people that have no hacking skills, that couldn't code their way out of a wet paper bag, can go buy a piece of software from a real hacker, click some buttons, put in your email address, and they just sent you something that could take your network down if you click it. So this has really changed the game. If you think back to the 1980s, the movies about hackers and they're all, typing away in a dark room, that's not what the modern fraudster is. They don't have to be knowledgeable about technology to be able to attack and compromise a corporate network. All they have to be able to do is pay the right people who are knowledgeable to give them the tools they need, and then they need to find a victim who's willing to click a link, open an attachment, or take some further action that gives them access to the corporate network or to a computer. So with this lowering of the bar, we've seen an abundance of email scams, normal phishing emails. You have the Nigerian prince, advanced fee fraud scams, where someone is offering you a ridiculous amount of money as long as you send them some smaller amount of money. You've got overpayment scams, such as someone purchasing something that you've listed for sale in an online marketplace. They send you a check for more money than the item is worth and ask you to refund the difference. The same overpayment scam can occur at businesses as well. Typically, they'll use a check. They could use some other form of payment as well, like an electronic deposit. The key is the money they pay for the service or the product was stolen, And if you actually repay the difference that they overpaid, they are going to get free money from you when that stolen money is pulled back out of your account. If it looked like that check cleared, well, the person whose account it cleared against is going to tell their bank it's fraudulent, and they're going to come back and pull that fraudulent check out of your account. And you're going to be left having paid the fraudster the overpayment, the difference, and having to pay back the amount of the check. And you may not have that item that you sold it either. Of course, over the past year, we've seen a explosion of COVID-related scams, whether it's fake tests, priority line for the free vaccine. If anyone's paying money to get the vaccine, that's not appropriate. There's just, any time there's a major natural disaster or some significant event, fraudsters will immediately jump on it to dupe people into sending them money. They have no shame, and we see that every time. COVID's no different. Now, the normal email scams, folks have gotten pretty good at not falling victim to. You do see quite a few consumers, businesses not as frequently falling for these email scams. Phishing is kind of a variant on that email scam where the sender, the fraudster, is trying to get access to or information about anyone willing to click on the phishing link. They're basically going phishing. They've cast their line out to whoever will answer them. And if someone receives this email and they're, say, a millennial, this is a threat that your Facebook account is going to be deactivated due to copyright activity unless you click this link and fill out the form. So the link in the email says it's going to Facebook. It has HTTP. It doesn't have the S there, but that really doesn't mean anything. Whatever this URL or this link looks like it is going to, if you hover over it, it might actually be going somewhere different. And some fraudsters have actually been able to disguise that hover over the little pop-up. So you really can't trust a link in an email. If the person who received this clicks this link, they're going to probably be presented with a screen that looks like Facebook, and most likely it's going to ask them to log in, because that's really what the fraudsters are going for. They want your account credentials. So if you click that link and give them your Facebook username and password, I can guarantee the next thing that's going to happen is all your friends and contacts are going to receive some sort of communication from you that's not actually from you, because what they want to do is impersonate your identity to gain access to your group of contacts and to gain access to the trust that your group of contacts places in you. So this is a pretty common phishing scheme. You'll see these come in purporting to be from the IRS, from the US Marshal Service, from FedEx or any other delivery, UPS, etc. And it almost universally is an attempt to either get your account credentials for some sort of service or to get you to install some sort of unwanted software on your computer. Now, the fraudsters have evolved. The old school simple phishing emails like we were just looking at tended to have misspellings. They weren't always professionally put together. Well, with the evolved email threat, we're seeing professional writing, well-written, effective attack emails that look like they're sent by the person who they are impersonating. We're seeing regional targeting. So we have fraudsters targeting industries and areas. And if they win, if they get money from a victim, they go onto their cybercrime forum and they brag about having managed to fool whichever target that they went for. They will talk about what was effective, what worked, and then the other fraudsters on that cybercrime forum will attempt the same type of attacks against other members of the same industry in the same geographic area. And they aren't just sending out these blind emails blind. They are doing a premeditated selection of their victims. They are researching who works at that company. They're looking at the company website. They're then looking up that company on LinkedIn. They're forging identities and using stolen social media profiles to get pictures and titles. And then they're forming their own LinkedIn profile and trying to connect with people at those companies so that they can get more information about how that company works, who works in what position. And then they send a well-crafted attack email to a specific person, and that's a spear fish. So instead of casting a big net to catch whatever fish goes by, they're crafting one well-formulated spear and they're attacking a specific fish. So as an example of spear phishing, this is a real email. It went out to quite a few Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. It purported to be from a customer or a shareholder of a company that's publicly traded. In the email, the writer says that an employee of the company posted negative comments about the company in general and you specifically, that you're overpaid and incompetent. And again, this was going to a C-suite level executive at that company, which is publicly traded. And in that comment, your employee gave detailed instances of his disagreements, and in doing so may have unwittingly divulged confidential company information regarding pending transactions. So that language right there is intended to immediately get the attention of any, CEO, chief legal counsel, anyone that understands SEC rules and regulations, because these companies were often involved in mergers and acquisitions. And revealing an insider trading type of information about a pending merger and acquisition is a serious offense that they could suffer serious fines for. So the goal here is to get the person who received this email to think emotionally and to worry about what may be happening here. They're now driven by emotion instead of logic because they've read these comments about them. They see that there could be an SEC violation, and they click the link to see what was said. Now, this link probably goes somewhere to a website that the fraudster set up. There's probably even a forum post that they're describing. It wouldn't have any detailed specific information about the person that received the email. But in order to see it, it popped up a prompt asking for that person's credentials, their username and password. Well, these C-suite executives, lawyers, legal counsel, etc., really did fall for this email in real life. The group that was perpetrating it was known as Fnba. They successfully targeted over 100 publicly traded companies. They got information about pending mergers and acquisitions, and then they traded on that information on Wall Street. Now, the folks who placed those illegal trades using insider information were eventually arrested by the SEC after a long investigation. There's more details about this specific scheme in FireEye's report, Hacking the Street. It's quite a long read, but these bad actors were extremely sophisticated. Their email was fairly difficult to catch. But you may have noticed, I mentioned the person who received the email, they had to provide their username and password for the scheme to move forward. So this ultimately could have been prevented with better training and better policies and processes being communicated to the executive staff of these firms who were targeted. Before I move on from here, I do always mention the people who made the illegal trades were caught and prosecuted by the SEC. I guarantee, and I've given this presentation alongside an FBI agent who nodded his head and agreed with me. The mastermind behind this scheme, the folks who ultimately siphoned that money overseas, they were not caught and arrested and prosecuted for their crimes. They are still at large, and they're devising the next scheme right now. Most of these fraudsters are operating overseas in non-extradition countries, and unless they mistakenly visit a country where there's jurisdiction or an extradition treaty, they're not going to be prosecuted in a U.S. court of law. So what we're seeing and really getting into the fraud threats that are that Alaskan businesses are having to face is a massive increase in business email compromise. That's a type of fraud that uses what appears to be legitimate business email accounts, possibly could be spoofed email addresses where the sender seems like it's a legitimate address, but the email is actually coming from a different email address. Or they may have actually compromised that person's address. So that person sending the email could be a vendor, it could be your boss, it could be the CEO of the company, and the email might legitimately come from that sender because their webmail was compromised, or it might be coming out from outside of the network. It could be some spoofed email that person has never seen in their life and wouldn't show up in their inbox or outbox. Typically, these emails are targeting a specific person within the company who has access to payments, and they're usually containing some element of time pressure, urgency, and or secrecy, all of which are major red flags when you're talking about payments. So let's look into some of these specific business email compromise attempts. This is an email from the CEO going to the chief financial officer, the CFO, with an exclamation mark. So it's important. You know, boss says I need to do something. What are they asking me to do? Please process a wire for $250,000. Code it to admin expense by close of business today. Here's the wire instructions. So these emails could be coming from the CEO targeting the CFO. More typically, we're seeing them targeting more AP level staff. So instead of targeting the C-suite, they might be targeting an accountant within the accounting area, or they might be targeting a specific person that they know deals with payments at the business. The person who they purport to be, the fraudster sending this email, will typically be that person's supervisor or some executive within the company who should theoretically have authorization to authorize payments. Oftentimes we'll see they send these emails while that executive they're impersonating is out of the office, traveling, or otherwise not immediately available for the recipient to walk over to their office and talk to them. Particularly during COVID, when folks are working from home, there's much less of that basic double check that you might do swinging by someone's office and asking, you know, hey, do we really need to send this wire by close of business today? What's it for? You know, some of these kind of second check questions you might normally ask. And the most effective way to prevent this fraud is to pick up the phone and call the person using a number you know and make sure they actually sent that email. And then following your established procedures to prevent fraud. You probably don't want insider fraud to be committed either. So any payments should be authorized properly using whatever processes you follow. So again, I mentioned this as a wire by close of business today. There's the sense of urgency here. And the reason the fraudster wants a wire is a wire transaction is not typically recoverable. It's immediate good funds. And if that wire posts to an account that fraudster controls and they're standing in that bank lobby, they can withdraw that money as cash and it is gone. It will never be able to be recovered at that point. As companies got better at their AP, strengthening their AP processes, and accounts payable staff got wise to that CEO scheme, we've seen the fraudsters now divert their attention to payroll. So they will craft an email purporting to be from an employee. They're targeting HR staff, usually a specific person in HR. So they'll send an email to Glenda and it won't CC the HR inbox. They don't want too many people's eyes on it. They'll purport to be the employee and say, hey, send me the form to update our direct deposit. I got a new bank account. When the fraudster gets the form, if the recipient of this email replies, they're going to fill out that form with the employee's sensitive, private, personal information, probably including their social security number and other details that shouldn't be public. And if the payroll processor goes ahead and updates that deposit account, they're going to be in for a rude awakening on the day payroll happens when that employee, the real employee, contacts them and says, why didn't I get paid? And so this is another area where picking up the phone, verifying that information that came in via email through another means, through a second factor, is incredibly important. Now, this typically isn't wires. This would be direct deposit that they're targeting, trying to get that ACH payment to go into a different account. Last but not least, we've also seen business email compromise attacks targeting gift cards. So this is a fairly new tactic within the last 3 to 4 years, but it's continuing to be on the rise. Now, this does not always come in via email. Oftentimes, there is an email involved, and then it will escalate to text messages. So the fraudster has figured out the phone numbers and the contact information of folks within the organization. They pretend to be a CEO or another executive, typically who's traveling, or is away from the office, and they will request a lower level employee, usually not someone that reports directly to them, but someone a step or two down the hierarchy. So they're getting a message from their boss's boss saying, hey, I'm at a conference, I've got these potential clients, I need you to go get some gift cards so I can do a raffle and give away some $200 gift cards. Really big opportunity for the business. Can you do this right away for me? I'll text you. And so that's usually the first email. And then the fraudster connects with that employee via cell phone. They keep the employee engaged and busy, whether it's through phone calls, texts, emails. They almost harass them to go get it done, get the card numbers, take pictures of the front and back of the gift card and send it to them. And as soon as they do that, oftentimes that's the moment when the employee realizes, wait a second, this isn't normal. And by that time, the fraudsters drain that gift card and they've gone and spent the money. And the really unfortunate thing about these gift card scams is typically the employee is purchasing the gift card with a corporate credit card or with their own card. And so the business that they purchased that gift card from provided a legitimate service. If your bank tries to go and charge back that transaction to that business, whether it's Walgreens or Fred Meyer, the retailer that you purchased that gift card from did nothing wrong. You then took the monetary instrument that you purchased, that gift card, and essentially handed it away to someone outside the door. Really, the only way to try to stop and get the money back at this point is if the card hasn't been drained by the fraudster yet, you might have an opportunity to call the gift card issuer, the number on the card that says it's their customer service line, and tell them your card was stolen and ask them to stop, to freeze the funds and return the money to you. And there's a slight chance that that could be possible, but unless you catch it right away, it's real tough. So again, this would be preventable by calling back a number and verifying the request's authenticity. So that's business email compromise. We're going to go into a pop quiz here. And again, I haven't told any of you the answers, so don't stress too much. I'm not the evil college professor here, although I do play one on Zoom calls. How much money do you think fraudsters stole between 2013 and 2019 via business email compromise? So that includes all of those different fraud schemes that we just covered. $6 billion, $16 billion, $26 billion, or $46 billion. And I see some answers flooding into the chat. And again, you can just click the chat there. Got a lot of folks that believe it might be D or C, and you guys are real close. It is C. $26 billion was lost to business email compromise schemes between 2013 and halfway into 2019. Now this number is a little dated. I did some sleuthing through the FBI and the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3.gov websites. I haven't seen the updated version of this exact loss number, but at the end of the presentation here, I have an update on how much fraud was lost just last year, how much money was lost to electronic fraud just in the last year in 2020. And so I'll save that for the end as kind of a little surprise, but this number, by the way, when I started giving this presentation around 2013, was less than $1 billion. It was 900 million. The first time that I gave a presentation about business email compromise. So this amount of losses has been on an exponential growth trend for almost a decade. I expect it to continue to grow because the fraudsters have taken $26 billion, and I'm sure they use some of it for fun and to play with, but the bulk of it they've reinvested into their tools, their techniques, their infrastructure, into hiring. These fraudsters actually pay call centers to handle fraud calls for them. So when they're trying to dupe someone into sending them money, they will have all sorts of stories and means to try to fool that person. And if they, try to call the number that's listed in the email, someone will actually answer that phone call and they will seem legitimate. They will purport to be whoever that fraudster has told that crime call center to pretend to be. And they have scripts ready to go to convince and fool people into sending them money. So let's go ahead and pause here for some Q&A. And if I see there's already some questions in the chat, anyone that does want to ask a question, you can click that Q&A box. It's right next to the chat box there. And then you could ask any questions there that you may like to. And we'll just pause here for a second, Louis.
Yeah, Mike, we do have some questions here that I'll throw your way. So first question we have, if someone does convince my staff to send money, doesn't the name on the account have to match the name on the payee?
Right. So we run into this quite often, and the answer is usually not. Unfortunately, with an ACH payment in particular, that payroll scheme that we were talking about, payroll diversion, the ACH rules say that banks do not have to match the name on the transaction as long as the account number is accurate. And so with those payroll diversion payments, the name doesn't have to match. And folks believe that it does, which gives them a false sense of security. As long as that account number is a valid account with the receiving bank, that transaction can clear and that fraudster can withdraw the funds. Now, some banks will look at the names. They might contact the customer of theirs if they see some suspicious activity. But oftentimes, by the time the bank is seeing suspicious activity, that activity has been going on that account, prior to them seeing it. So at a certain point, the funds are going to be able to get access by the fraudster until that account is identified as not legitimate. With wire transfers, there's a little more reliance on the name matching depending on the bank and what country the funds transfer is going to. Some countries have more restrictive controls on the name. But again, in each of these different jurisdictions, there's different rules and regulations and requirements for what it takes to open an account. And these fraudsters are very savvy at stealing identities. They may have opened an account in their target victim's name at some foreign bank and then have requested a foreign wire transfer to that bank, in which case, if the name matches, the account number matches, that receiving bank isn't going to see any indicator that it's fraud. So really, you've got to stop the fraud from going out. You can't rely on the receiving bank to stop the fraudulent item it received. Great question.
Thanks, Mike. Next question we have, should I just pay everything with check if the fraud is moving to electronic?
No. So I talk about the electronic fraud a lot. I talk about how the electronic fraud is on the rise. But actually, when you look at the total fraud numbers, there's more money lost via checks today, even now, than there is via electronic payments. So checks are inherently risky. If you think about, if I get a check from you, what do I have on that check? Well, I've got your company name, I've got your logo, whatever your check stock looks like, I can copy that now. On that check at the bottom, I'm going to have your bank's routing number and your account number. I know what number sequence your checks are now going out as. If this is check number 11,503, I can bet that if I do some sort of fake check in the 11,500 range, that it's probably going to be kind of in line with the current checks that are being processed against that account. And I have your signature. So really, by receiving that check, I now have everything I need to create fraudulent checks and clear other types of checks against your account. And it's good to note, we've seen check fraud schemes like lottery schemes and other things where the check is being drawn against your account, but it doesn't look anything like your check stock. It looks like it's a lottery winnings from another state. And these folks are receiving these checks, cashing them, sending a portion of the funds to the fraudster. And by the time you report the check is stolen, the person who received the lottery winnings is now another victim in the chain. And they've been duped into sending that money to the original fraudster. So checks are not more secure. Really, the best way to avoid the electronic fraud is to establish solid processes and have controls in place to make sure that any payments going out are authorized and legitimate.
Thanks, Mike. We do have one more, and a reminder to folks, use that Q&A box there to type in any questions. Mike will be having one more session later, so if you have more questions, type those in. But the next question we have here is, how slick are these emails really? Shouldn't my employees realize that they're suspicious?
So we've seen a wide variety of these emails, and to be honest, some of them are not that sophisticated and are still effective. Others, it is really hard to tell that it's a fraudulent email. I have seen an email chain that was a successful attack against a company where the fraudster had accessed an executive's webmail, we believe. They didn't hack the company's network, but they got into the external webmail. So maybe Outlook web access or some other form of getting into the email remotely, which many companies have now enabled because of COVID and the pandemic and work from home environment. In that executive's email was an email chain going back and forth. There was a vendor involved, there was an executive approving a payment, and there was payment staff setting up a payment. The fraudster inserted themselves in the middle of that email chain as the executive and sent an email to the payment staff where they basically mocked up or forged an email from the vendor that was never sent. The vendor did not send this email. But underneath, when you go into an email chain and you click forward or reply all, they forged a new set of emails beneath their email that the fraudster initiated, making it look like the vendor had sent the executive new payment instructions. They then sent an email as the executive to the payment staff with a new invoice document attached to it that had updated payment instructions the day before that payment needed to be made. And the fraudster, pretending to be the executive, instructed that payment staff to go ahead and send the funds to a different account number, and it was an account number under the fraudster's control. So that was very difficult for the recipient to realize it was fraudulent unless they had a solid procedure to follow, which would have told them to call the person sending the email or to go through another level or round of approvals for the change to the payment instruction. It's important to note that any payment instruction change requests that you receive, whether it be from an employee changing their payroll account or a vendor telling you that their deposit needs to come into a different account for their invoice, those requests should be verified out of band. You should not trust a request received via email. Email was not designed when it was originally conceived in the 1960s with DARPANET. Email was not designed or conceived of as a secure communication system. Email is inherently insecure because of how it works. So these emails can fool almost anyone if they're not paying enough attention, and if they don't have a solid set of processes to follow on their side, business procedures that protect that account payment method. Think of it like fax invoice fraud via fax. When faxes came out, and I don't know whether that was the 70s or earlier, but when the fax machines first got put into everyone's office throughout the country, fraudsters realized they could send fake invoices and fake bills via fax, and that people at accounts payable departments would pay them. It's the same thing. You don't know who's really sending that email or who's really sending that fax with a request for payment until you verify using a number via picking up the phone and talking to that person. Those are great questions. Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, everyone. I think I'll just go ahead and go on to the next set of topics here. And then I do see there's some more questions coming in, and we can address those on the next Q&A session here. All right. So another topic that has stuck in my jaw for quite some time are these smart devices, IoT or Internet of Things, basically any sort of appliance that you purchase, whether it's an IP camera, an internet connected camera device, maybe it's your smart scale or some other sort of appliance in your house or in your office, those home control devices, or maybe it's your fridge that tells you when you're running out of OJ. You know, if I'm purchasing a hardware device and it's not a networking device and it wants my network credentials, I am immediately suspicious of that device. Is it from a major manufacturer? Does it have software support? Is it receiving security patches? Perhaps it has default login credentials of admin and password that anyone can log into externally or internally to my network. Ideally, these devices can be put behind a firewall and have their internet access locked down by an IT professional. If you absolutely have to use these devices in your network, I would not put them on a mission critical network. They shouldn't be on the same network that has all of your files and important information on it. And ideally, someone external to your network cannot try to log into that device. And what the Internet of Things explosion has led to, what we've seen actually happen in the wild, is these devices are not designed with security in mind. Again, kind of like email, it was designed to accomplish a task, providing ease of access without thinking about what are the negative consequences that could come, what are the downsides of giving every single device access to the network. And so what we saw was a massive denial of service attack where a botnet of devices, Internet of Things devices like IP cameras, was taken over by a fraudster using a program that they wrote called Mirai. The kid that wrote Mirai was a kid. It turned out he was prosecuted. I think he was 16 or 17 at the time he programmed this network to take over to generate a network of bots. Essentially what he did is he looked at about 25 different IP cameras, other sorts of smart devices, and looked at what their default login credentials were, how they allow you to log in when you buy it from the store and pull it out of the box. And most of these devices had simple login credentials like admin and password, just static values that were easily guessed. He then programmed a script that would scan for devices. It would attempt the default login, and if it got in, it would then take over the device and use it to scan for more devices. So you can imagine you start with 2 compromised devices, then 4, then 8, then 16, 32, 64. It grows exponentially. Well, in 2016, there was a record-setting, there's been larger ones now since then, 620 gigabit per second DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack that targeted Krebs on security, which is, I have a quote from Brian Krebs. He's a security researcher on the first slide here of this presentation. He had exposed some of their illegal underground cybercrime forums in one of his articles. So as retribution, this owner of this botnet used it to attack his website and take it offline. The site was successfully taken offline. It came back online under Cloudflare, and Cloudflare, which is a denial of service protection service, eventually cut the site off of their service because it was so expensive to mitigate an attack of that size. The only reason that security researcher and journalist website came back online was due to a program that Google was running, and they took the loss on the flood of traffic. So this botnet was used to commit a crime that took a legitimate researcher offline. It was also a demonstration of the capabilities of that botnet, and the owners of that group of compromised devices then turned around and used them to rent out access to this botnet to other criminals on their cybercrime forums. So that again goes back to that cybercrime economy. They are taking these tools and sharing them with each other to help facilitate additional crime and to earn money from folks that are committing crimes, rather than taking the money directly and being more at risk of getting caught and prosecuted. Unfortunately, even though the person who wrote Mirai was eventually caught and prosecuted, he released the source code for this device, this botnet generating script. And so anyone that wants to can basically create a similar botnet. And the reason they're able to is these inherently insecure Internet of Things devices that people buy. They take it home from the store, they plug it into their network, and they never even think about what access that device may have to their network, or what access other people outside of their network may have to that device. And the manufacturers are typically overseas. There might be a fly-by-night manufacturer that creates a white label product, sells it to 15 distributors, and then they go out of business. There's no more security patches. So you really want to be wary of these devices that you allow in your network, and really look at their level of security and how much access they should have. Now, corporate account takeover is similar to business email compromise, but instead of taking over an executive's email inbox and then sending emails trying to get someone with payment access to send a payment, in the corporate account takeover attack, the criminals are going for direct access over the payments. Many banks, including First National, have implemented tokens or other two-factor authentication devices where you might have to receive a text and put in a number, or you have a device, a hardware device yourself that you control, that you're putting a number that automatically randomly generates every so many seconds to verify that you are actually the person you purport to be when you log in. So we don't just rely on a username and password to help prevent these corporate account takeover attacks. What the fraudsters have started doing is trying to social engineer and trick employees into giving up those token codes. So it's really important, if you have a two-factor authentication device, you're using a text message, you're using an authenticator app, or you have a physical token or a software token, that you control that token number and you don't share it with anyone. The bank's not going to ask you, we're never going to call you and ask you for that token number. You just put it into the field that you put it in on your screen. Well, if the fraudsters can't trick someone into giving up the token, they will try to get into the network or into the computer and then copy the token number as you're typing it in. So the way they do that, first they have to compromise your computer or your network. And so email is the #1 threat vector. There's always, everyone has it, it's ubiquitous. Email is just universal, and almost always what they're trying to do is get someone to open an attachment or click a link. And the links are by far more common with different firewall devices scanning attachments. But you might see your IT folks might not let you receive a zip file, and if they don't, they might want to think about blocking zip files. Virus scanning tools often have difficulty opening a zip and then scanning the things that are within that zip file. So if they do send a bad attachment, usually it'll be zipped, and they'll ask you to unzip the file and then run some sort of executable. Now they can also try to get malicious software or malware onto a computer through a website using a pop-up or a download prompt. And if you have an unpatched vulnerability, so there's something wrong with your browser, maybe it's an older browser like Internet Explorer, or it's just an old version of a browser that still needs to be updated, they might be able to do a drive-by download where if you go to their website, or if a malware infected ad is served to you at a legitimate website, that ad could infect your computer with or without you clicking or even knowing that something has infected the website. There's things called watering hole attacks where they will target, the fraudster will target a specific website that they know folks at a certain industry will visit. And if they can compromise that website, then they can serve malware to the people who visit that website. Now there's still old school network penetration. So the hacker that walks into your building and plugs into your network and just starts doing stuff because your router was exposed. Or if they can't actually connect directly to your network, they'll get your employees to do it for them by leaving some USB thumb drives that say free movies or free music, music collection, MP3s, whatever it says on the face of that thumb drive. They'll leave it at a cafe, in the parking lot, in the lobby of your business. And if one of your employees picks it up and is curious and they stick it into their computer, that fraudster has now just gained access to and control over that computer, and potentially irrevocably so, using a tool called bad USB. They might have permanent control over that computer by having infected your USB hardware devices, the controllers that access the USB device. And even if you reformat that whole computer, uninstall everything, delete the hard drive, replace it with a new hard drive, and install a fresh copy of Windows onto it, that USB controller is still infected and it might still be able to reinfect the computer. That is also, by the way, the method that was used to attack Iran centrifuges, Stuxnet. And so basically these nuclear researchers working on a highly confidential, top secret, illegal nuclear research program found USB thumb drives in cafes around Tehran that Foreign Intelligence Service knew that they visited, that said stuff like American movies or free MP3s or whatever it is, content that they couldn't get in their highly controlled government. And when they went back to work, they happened to walk those USBs right past all the security devices protecting those computers and plugged them into the network that controlled the centrifuges to see what was on them, which then allowed those centrifuges to be sabotaged through industrial control systems, or ICS. So USB drives, you really want to protect your endpoints, your users from themselves, and protect those computers from them. And so there's a thing called endpoint device protection. There's multiple vendors that provide that type of service, and you can kind of lock down the access so that your employees can't plug USB in. And they should know better. If you teach them properly and make sure they're cognizant of the threats, they shouldn't ever actually go take a USB device and plug it into their computer. And that includes charging your phone. Bring a phone charger in. Don't plug your phone into your computer to charge it, because if that phone gets hacked and then you plug that phone into that computer, it might be capable of hacking the computer. And last but not least is vendor compromise. We've now seen an explosion of supply chain attacks where vendors are not the ultimate target, but vendors are being compromised in order to target their customers. So malicious software being bundled along with legitimate updates to software that a company has purchased. So alongside that, I would be remiss to not mention ransomware in this speech, particularly with the rise of ransomware over the the 2020 timeframe. Ransomware increased, I was reading a report the other day, by almost 500% year over year from 2019 to 2020. So ransomware is just massively exploding. For anyone that doesn't know what ransomware is, it's when your computer gets taken over and the fraudsters have a program that automatically locks up all your important files, documents, etc., maybe your entire network, or your network drives, and they get encrypted. And then the fraudster demands a payment, and usually in Bitcoin or some other less traceable form of currency, in order to unlock the files. Now, these are criminals who are committing a crime. They're not exactly the best customer service or software engineers. So even if you pay the ransom, you may see a follow-on ransom attack. So you might pay the ransom, and then they realize that you're going to send money, so then they encrypt your files again and demand another ransom. So they might double dip. Or the tool they give you to unlock your files, it might work on one or two files, but it's not working when you try to unlock your entire drive. And the fraudsters got that malware onto your network, into your computer device somehow. There's a flaw, there's a hole in your security. Well, paying the ransom doesn't patch the hole. So you could then get attacked by a different group via the same method that ransomware initially got on to your network. I never recommend paying a ransom. The best method is almost always restoring from an offline backup that you took. So that might mean losing a day of work, but restoring from backup is much better than continuing to fund these illegal activities by the fraudsters. There's also wiper attacks. I won't go into those too much. The supply chain is much more important. I did mention that we're seeing more and more of these supply chain attacks. This is where the attacker is going after the vendor and getting malware into their code so that they then deliver a fraudulent patch to you as their customer. the real world example of this, the biggest one that I've ever seen is SolarWinds. The SolarWinds compromise, it looks like there's actually multiple nation states involved, not just Russia, but China's gotten in on this. It was very sophisticated. SolarWinds disclosed as many as 18,000 of their customers may have been affected. It looks like from what the attackers were targeting is they were going after major tech companies and government access, and they were stealing highly sensitive information for months, almost a year. So these types of attacks, it's third-party risk. It's what vendors do you want to work with, and what controls do those vendors have against something happening, and performing your due diligence against that risk. I mentioned earlier, and we're almost at the end here, that the fraudsters do already have the Social Security number and private information for your employees, and this is why. Massive data breaches. For example, Equifax spilled 145.5 million American Social Security numbers, driver licenses, other data in 2017. Yahoo in 2013, they were breached and lost all 3 billion of their email accounts, login, password, and secret questions. And around 2013 is when we saw business email compromise start really exponentially growing, likely fueled by the wealth of data the fraudsters got from Yahoo's breach and others. So getting into the how do you prevent being a victim part of the presentation, which is just going to be a couple slides here, and then we'll take those last few questions. Don't use one of these passwords. I love this list. I gather a list of these every year. There's different vendors that have provided it. This one's from NordPass. And what they do is they go through the data breaches every year, and they try to crack the passwords. They run a tool and they see what passwords are most common. And unfortunately, password number 123456 is still the reigning champion at number 1. None of these passwords are secure. A good password should be indecipherable. It should be 12 or more characters, upper and lower case, numbers, not just one set of characters. There's also some lines of thought that, it's okay to have a dictionary word and decipherable password as long as it's extremely long, and that might make it more memorable. There's different opinions on that, but just don't make a 6-digit password that's all numbers. So pop quiz, what should every payment be checked against? Account balance, a valid source document, or vendor performance metrics? And in the interest of time here, I'm going to move right into, it should be checked against a valid source document. You don't want to trust email for payments. Email is not a valid way to provide a source document in most cases, unless you verified it out of band. As individuals, for personal protection and prevention, we can monitor our credit reports regularly. You can pull a free credit report from annualcreditreport.com. Congress mandated that the credit bureaus provide one per year. Well, there's 3 credit bureaus, so you can actually check your credit 3 times a year by setting a every 4 months calendar reminder to pull a free credit report. If you know you're a victim, you might want to consider getting a credit monitoring service, or the company that had a data breach affecting you may have offered you free credit monitoring. You may also want to consider freezing your credit, but just be careful about that, because if you go to get a new cell phone plan or move, and you're trying to do anything that may involve someone checking your credit, you might need to unfreeze or thaw that credit in order to proceed with that transaction, particularly if you're getting a loan or anything like that. So that's a couple of things we can do as individuals. Strong passwords. We want to patch our computers. Windows Update, don't skip it. Patch the programs on your computer. If it's installed, patch it. If you're not going to use it, uninstall it, because that unpatched Adobe, you might think you don't look at PDFs, but then you get an email from a fraudster and open a booby-trapped PDF, and it goes into that unpatched Adobe, and you're going to have a whole world of hurt there. And then we want to monitor a statement and account activity. So if you see something fraudulent, you want to report it to your bank right away. Don't wait. Consumers are protected to a certain extent for certain transactions under certain conditions by Regulation E. Businesses are not protected by Regulation E. As businesses, we want to monitor accounts daily. We often have 24 hours or less to detect and respond to fraud. We want to use our firewall and intrusion prevention systems. We should have someone monitoring those devices. If the alarm's going off and no one's listening, it's not helping you. Our ACH and wire operators should be in dual control. So kind of like the old school, one person has a key, one person has a combo. You've got one person sending the items based on a source document and a second person reviewing that source document, looking at the items they're approving and approving them if they're authorized. So if there's a change request that came in outside of the established procedures, like a random email, that person approving, if the submitter fell for it and sent the item, that approver is the last chance to try to stop that item from going out. So make sure your folks are implementing the controls that you've established in your processes. And protect your weakest link. Train your employees. Make sure they're aware of these threats. Test them. Run phishing tests. Send them fake emails that could be fraudulent, and see who falls for it, who clicks on the link. And do more than the bare minimum. You can set up ACH debit filtering solutions with your bank. All banks should offer some sort of product like that. At First National, we offer a product called ACH Fraud Prevention, which looks at those debit requests coming into your account to pull money out and provides you an opportunity to return those items. If they're not approved, they get automatically rejected. And then checks, those paper checks I mentioned, those can be a big source of fraud. And in fact, the total dollar losses of check fraud exceeds the total dollar losses of business email compromise. So look at Positive Pay or a service to protect your checks. I'll leave on a couple best practices here. This just kind of summarizes what we had talked about. And let's go into our last Q&A session. I think we just have a couple minutes left.
Hey, Mike, and I know we're running on time here, but we do have some great questions that I think would be great to answer for the whole crew. So we'll just keep going here. Mike, can you tell everybody what ACH payments are?
Yeah, oh, sorry if I didn't define that. ACH is the automated clearinghouse, and that is basically direct deposit. So if you receive your paycheck directly into your bank account without having to actually go deposit a check, that's ACH. There's another
Mike,
one I see. Sorry, let me just jump into this one about the unsubscribe option. A great question. Wanting to unsubscribe from those spam emails, but worrying that it might be an attempt to hack. What's the recommendation? So that's a great question. And this is actually a vector that fraudsters are using. They are actually putting a malicious link in the unsubscribe and then sending what looks to be spam to a recipient so that person clicks unsubscribe. And so there's a couple of ways to handle that. Ideally, if you have an IT area and you're running some sort of mail appliance to protect your email systems, then you can ask that IT group or the information security team or whatever your process is at your company to block that sender. And that's the best way so that you're not having to click that unsubscribe link.
Thanks, Mike. Next question we have, can you talk a little bit about www.fnbalaska.com versus .co versus .us? We see a lot of these emails coming through, and they've made it through several stages of the account and almost being paid.
So anyone sending an email can pretend that that email is coming from any website that they want. The email address you see as sending your email there may not be the actual email address sending it. So they're spoofing that email. They're pretending it's from the bank, but it's not. And so that is very difficult. Really the best spot to stop those types of email spoofing attacks is in your email appliance, your security devices, protecting your corporate network. And there's plenty of vendors that provide things like Barracuda, Proofpoint, and others. I can't recommend a specific one, but you'll want to do some due diligence and look at your third parties and see which ones provide a tool that can help protect your inbox. There's rules where you can kind of have that device see in the email header where this email came from and kind of try to filter out those spoofed emails so that they don't show up in inboxes as often.
Next up, Mike, I see people taking pics of their paychecks to deposit. How safe is that?
Yeah, so it depends on your perspective. I mentioned that paycheck, that has a lot of information. It has that paycheck has your account number. If you're the one that wrote the paycheck to the employee, it has your other information, your signature, etc. So if that employee submits that paycheck picture directly through their bank's secure app, the submission of that image to their bank should be protected by encryption. That's pretty secure. But the real world question is, what's then happening to the paycheck after they take the picture? Are they keeping it under lock and key for a certain period of time before destroying it using a cross-cut shredder? Or are they taking that paycheck that they just took a picture of and sticking it in a drawer that anyone in their household has access to? Or maybe they were standing in line at the store and they did the picture deposit, and then they threw it in a trash can that anyone can now go fish into that trash can and pull that paycheck back out of. These are the kinds of weaknesses with that mobile deposit that you really can't control because it's user behavior. So ultimately, the technical aspects of submitting a check for deposit are fairly secure. It's the people aspect, the weaknesses inherent to having human beings dealing with something that can lead to potential fraud. So really a check that you've deposited remotely should be probably stored under lock and key for a certain period of time in case the image was bad, and then shredded using a crosscut shredder so it can't be put back together. I don't know how many people have crosscut shredders at home. I would imagine many of those checks are going right into the trash. And we've seen fraudsters in Anchorage digging through trash to find financial information and use it to commit identity theft. And First National actually helped bust a fraud gang that was running around stealing checks out of the mail and then creating fraudulent checks. So there are people actively out there trying to steal your identity and steal your financial information here in Alaska, who would gladly take your remotely deposited payroll check and then use it to create a variety of fraudulent checks to try to negotiate. I think we're pretty much out of time here, Louis. These were great questions, everyone. I know we couldn't get to all of the questions, but I believe we can get a copy of all of this out of the Zoom logs, and then I'd be happy to respond to any other questions we haven't addressed. And following this here, I'll go ahead and send a PDF copy of this presentation to everyone who registered. I just want to thank you all for joining and taking the time to learn about this very important topic, because it all comes down to one question, which is how much are you willing to lose? And if you aren't willing to take the steps to prevent a loss, then eventually you will become a victim. So train your weakest link, make sure you do more than the bare minimum, and don't be the low-hanging fruit for these fraudsters who are only continuing to increase their attacks. Thank you.